Okay. Let's see here. Uh, okay. Now, let's say we want to um, let's say we want to have some text and also an image inside a text box. We want more than just these links, right? We want to maybe have a paragraph of text and an image nearby it that sort of relates to the text. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to make an image float. We can have it float to the left, we can have it float to the right, and essentially that means that it will kind of shift over, I guess you could say. So here we have some text. It's about an import company. I made a website for them a while ago, and a flag. Now, just to give you a sense, here's a website, and if you may think, oh well, this logo's not that good. Remember, the clients sometimes decide on the logo. They'll come to you before you start doing a project, and they've already spent money on the logo. So if you don't think this is top notch, remember, wasn't my choice. These are good, really pretty successful business people. And so let me give you, so this is floating. So an image here, it's kind of floating over to the right. Okay, you can see how that's happening, right? And the text kind of goes around it, right? And now you'll see here that, how right here we can see the background changes when we hover our mouse over it. Well, you can make even more changes to that. You can see how that kind of fades. Do you see how it fades? I'm going to go into how to do that, and on this channel you'll learn how to do that. Now, here's another thing. You see how this image with these scoops is sort of tacked on to the back of the web page, and the other content seems to flow up beyond it. Okay, well, that is it gives it a 3D effect. We're also going to learn how to do that, and this is on my local development server, so it's a little different than what's out there in the wild, so to speak. But at any rate, let's get back to where we are. We want to get to this point here, where we have a bunch of text here and an image that relates to it, but we want it to sort of naturally align up with things. Okay, all right. So the first thing we need to do is I'm going to paste in some text. And just a moment here. Let's see if I can get it. All right, well, first let's do this. So let's create our div tag. And this is going to contain all of the text that we have, and we'll call it About Us. All right. And so now we'll paste in our text. Okay. And we also want an image. Okay. So an image tag, you specify an image by just img, okay? And this is a self-closing tag. You don't need, you see how these other tags, they'll have an opening tag and then a closing tag. With the image tag, you don't need that, okay? And let's call it class about pic. And now you can see all these different attributes that PHP Storm suggested me. We want source. Okay. And that's the source of the image, and it suggests the images folder. So I'll click on that, /. I'll start to type and it suggests another image. Again, PHP Storm is really pretty nice. This IDE, PHP Storm, it's really pretty good. You can search on Google. It does cost a little money, but it's worth it. All right, so now where are we? Let's take a look here. All right, so that's not what we want, right? Okay, well, that's why we have CSS. So let's go into our CSS file here, and let's select the About Us tag again, right? So we're right here in the About Us tag, and let's do a few things with this. Maybe we could, how about, let's give it a width. Let's say 560 pixels. Let's, how about, oh, and if we don't give it a height, it will just naturally adjust. So as I add more content to this About Us, I may have given it a width that'll go from this point to this point, about 560 pixels. But when I put more stuff in it, it will go down, down, down. It will get bigger and bigger and bigger naturally. Okay? But let's do this. Let's also give it a margin left. Now we had 100 pixels on the others, so let's do that. And let's give it, well, just so that we can set it off, let's give it a border. So the first element will say 1 pixel. Then we'll give it the next attribute of its border. We'll say it's solid. And then we'll give it a color, black. Okay. Okay, so that's starting to do it. So we can see here. Okay, but we can see it's kind of, it's a little too close to the footer. It's a little too close to these. So let's see if there's something we can't do about that. Well, what can we do about that? We could give it, how about a margin top of, let's say, about 30 pixels, and let's give it a, let's change that width to 600, and let's see what happens with that. Okay. And we might as well give it a margin bottom of 30 pixels. Okay. Okay, so you can see that now it's set off from the footer. Now, how do we get this thing to float? Well, we remember here that this image, oh, now another thing that's worth noting here is, do you see how the text, it's sitting up right next to it on its same line? Well, this is because images naturally have an inline property, which means that, remember, there's block. In my previous video, I talked about there being in block display and inline block, and then again inline display. Well, for right now, we don't mind that. But what we do want to do is we want it to kind of float over to the right. And so how are we going to do that? Well, the first thing we need to do is what do we need to do? Well, first we need to target that image. So that we called about pic. Okay. You remember we have about pic. Okay. Now we can say float, and we could say left, we could say right. We're going to float it right. Okay. And let's do a few other things. Well, all right. I guess we could just okay, now you can see it's floated over to the right. You see that? And all the text naturally kind of wraps around it. And this, I think you can admit, you'll know that, yeah, this is a good idea. This is going to be useful because people like to, when they read about something, they like to have a graphic that sometimes will summarize the content of the text next to it, will represent that text sort of to kind of congeal or bring together the message inside that in the text, right? But that doesn't look quite right, does it? No, it doesn't. You can see that the text is pretty close to it. It doesn't feel just right. So what can we do about that? Well, let's see here. Okay. Why don't we do this? First, let's change the size of the picture. Let's give it a width. Or no, let's do this. Let's go for height. Let's give it 100 pixels. Now, here's a trick, an important trick. We're going to put width to auto. Okay? Because if I said, okay, 100, and let's say I put 100 as the width, let's watch what happens. It gets skewed, right? The width and the height need to maintain their proportion, and it's not doing that. Okay? So if we didn't have this trick I'm about to show you, you would need to estimate if you change the height from 150 pixels to 100, you would have to calculate that for the width. Well, there's a trick that will let you bypass all of that. Okay, what you do is, well, first let's take a look at this image. All right. So the height here is naturally 169. You can see that, right? Well, what I want to do, I want to change the height to 100 pixels. And then I want the browser just to naturally adjust the width to whatever is proportional or whatever it should be, given that I've changed the height. So I'll put auto. Okay? So then the browser will look at, okay, he's changed the height from 169 to 100. He's made it smaller. Now, the browser will say to itself, all right, given that, what sort of adjustments do I need to make to the width to make it proportional? And in fact, it will do that for you. Boom. Now, it's proportional. All right. Now, there are a few things you may be looking at this and going, well, I like the border. That looks good, but I don't like how all the text is, the text is too close to the border. I want it to set it off. All right, well, now we're going to use a new property, and it's called padding. Now, what is padding? Okay, well, first let's do it. we'll select padding, and let's try 15 pixels. All right, 15 pixels in from the edge of our div tag. Here's our div tag about us. Right now everything's scrunched up, but what we want to do is bring it in a little. Ah, sure enough. So here is the edge of our div tag, right? And now we have 15 pixels separating the edge of it from the content. So padding applies. Padding, you could think of padding as sort of like in an internal margin, internal to the element itself. The element is our div tag. Our content is our picture here, our image, and our text over here. So now it's not the margin between one element and these other elements over here and this element down here. It is, we call this padding, this area in here. Okay? All right. So now what else can we do? Well, I personally think that the text is coming maybe a little too close to the image. So let's give the image a little more. Now what are we going to do there? Are we going to use padding on that image? No. Because what we want to do now, I think the text is too close to the image. So I want to put a margin around the image itself. But I don't really want to do it over here. And I don't want to do it up here. I think that's good enough. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look, here we have about pic, and let's do this. Margin left, let's give that 15 pixels. And margin bottom, let's give that 15 pixels. And let's see what happens there. Okay, now you can see it's really set it off. Now maybe you think, well, that's too much. Maybe it should be something more like 8. And maybe you'd be right. I don't know. I don't have a perfect design sense, but it's good enough, right? All right, good enough. Let's see, what else? Well, that should do it.